LA is like nowhere. Everybody who lives here is lost.
I believe very dearly that everybody has at least one filmmaker or one collection of films that are so dear and personal to them that they have an infinite amount of words to apply to them. There is plenty of mainstream filmmakers who have audiences like this, but for me personally, that filmmaker has always been Gregg Araki, and more specifically his series of films known as the Teen Apocalypse Trilogy, a trilogy of films with unrelated stories yet recurring cast members and connected themes that have resonated with me so much in my life that I truly cannot see myself being the person I am today without them. I mean, these films are partly what inspired me to become a filmmaker in the first place. Araki has many films that I absolutely adore, but the Teen Apocalypse Trilogy in particular is probably his most interesting area of his career, spanning from his low-budget indie roots all the way up to the highest peak in scale of his career in terms of budget. The Teen Apocalypse Trilogy mixes themes of queer and punk rock nihilism along with psychosexual surrealism that makes for an intoxicating and atmospheric viewing experience that you can't get anywhere else. These films are incredibly special to me, and I wanted to make a video covering them in the best way I could for a very long time. So I hope I've done the films enough justice by at the very least getting some of you to check them out after this video, as they are truly some of the most introspective, radical, and amorous films I've seen in my life, with themes that have resonated with me and so many others. Araki is a pioneer of modern queer cinema, with many of his movies focusing on the struggles that gay people had to go through in the 90s, where homophobic violence and propaganda were at their highest. Araki's resolve to all of this was basically just saying, "Hey America, fuck you and your fascist ass, watch my gay movies and cry about it." And how on earth could you not respect such an anarchist? Each film in the trilogy is rather short, all clocking in at just under 90 minutes of runtime. Yet with so little time, Araki brings forth so many unique ideas, sets, characters, and visuals that you can't believe that the films are as low budget and straightforward as they are. They're some of the most impressively visualized and blocked movies ever made on a technical level, and I want to highlight that as well. With that being said, let's cut this intro and get straight into the meat of this trilogy with our first film, Totally Fucked Up.
I guess you could say I'm totally fucked up.
Immediately as you start the film, you'll notice a far more lo-fi and cheapish appearance compared to the films later covered in this video. This was like half intentional and half budgetary, as Araki aimed for the most grounded and guerrilla-like production he could possibly get, so as to keep the film in tune with the film he had made right before that, The Living End, which premiered just a year prior. Araki wrote, directed, shot, and edited the film entirely on his own with nothing but his own money and a little bit of financing from investors back during his prior film festival appearances, which gave him the ability to shoot the film in color. He shot it using his own 16mm camera and used resources within his vicinity in order to process and edit it. And the crew consisted only of 3 people: Araki, a sound recordist, and a producer. Everything else was entirely up to Araki himself to do, with the cast consisting of newer young faces from LA and recurring Araki stars as well. This gives the film a very homemade look to it that utilizes heavy film grain and mixtures both severely underexposed or severely overexposed shots and a lot of guerrilla filmed locations that were very obviously shot at without the proper permissions. With this all in mind, it's easy to assume that this style could have never been sustainable for 3 films, as just being able to make one film like this is a psychotic achievement on its own. And the production of this one film itself is what gave Araki the inspiration to even make a trilogy in the first place, as he states here. The way the Teen Apocalypse Trilogy came about was because I had made Totally Fucked Up. It was supposed to just be that one-off movie. It is very much inspired by this Godard movie called Masculine Feminine. It's basically an LGBT version of that film, about young gay and lesbian kids in LA. It was the experience of making that movie. It was being around them and hanging out with them. It's where I met Jimmy Duvall. It was the first movie we did together. The cast were all like 18 and 19 years old when I made it, and it took 6 months to shoot. It wasn't like a real movie. We were shooting on weekends, or, you know, what are you doing next Wednesday? That kind of thing. It was the experience of hanging out with those kids and learning about them and really getting a sense of what they were thinking and how they were feeling and how they were living. That sort of inspired me to do the trilogy, and so I wrote Nowhere and Doom Generation after that, and then I put Jimmy in the middle of all 3 movies. He plays different characters in all 3. That was the main inspiration behind it. Totally Fucked Up is the shortest of the trilogy, clocking in at only 79 minutes and is segmented into, as Araki states, 15 random celluloid fragments, so as to put a queer punk spin onto the structure of the Godard 1966 film. You can see his influence in a whole lot of Araki's work through structural homages like this, as well as direct visual references to Godard, such as putting posters of his films in the sets of his movies. Araki describes himself as being inspired by music far more than other filmmakers, but the filmmaking idols he does have, he will definitely insert them into the film. The film breaks these segments up through differing stretches of time and perspectives that follow a group of teenage/young adult friends, as one of them documents the way life currently is for queer youth in an America ran by gay panic and the AIDS scare, which was still very heavily prominent at the time. To say this film is aggressive would be like saying the sky is blue. It opens up with a newspaper study that showcases how 30% of all youths who commit suicide are gay, which pretty much sets the tone for the rest of the film as we go through the nihilistic angst of teens who don't really have anything besides drugs, sex, and their small clique of other lost souls. Araki himself never likes to call himself a voice for others, but this film here is what first cemented himself as an icon for younger audiences and queer audiences alike, acting as a voice for the voiceless with a film that isn't afraid to be both progressive and radical. It's certainly the most tame of the trilogy in terms of its aggression, but you can still tell a lot of it is there through how the film's scattered story plays out, tackling themes of repression, heartbreak, alienation, and substance abuse all together. Whilst his prior film, The Living End, was a far more intimate work, Totally Fucked Up acts as one of Araki's most introspective studies on sexuality and serves as one of his first big statements as a filmmaker, saying that he won't stand for the way things are, even if they are as hopeless and messed up as they seem. It stands as a way for Araki to properly represent what it must be like for gay and lesbian youths in this era to grow up around, with an environment trying to push religious and biological panic and warfare on you as a manifesto against your very existence. It holds basically no punches, as Araki literally inserts text onto the screen such as the downfall of stupid fucking Western civilization, and also just straight up calling Mel Gibson a homophobic asshole, which, by the way, is something he does in multiple films. He very specifically calls out Mel Gibson in multiple different movies of his for his homophobia, which is, you know what, just pure king shit, Araki. We love you for that. It really is very incredible and impressive and moving looking at a film like this, because in a world where things like this were happening and people obviously not wanting to throw thousands of dollars towards a psychosexual, radical, queer auteur film, we see here how Araki managed to succeed in making such a low-key yet confrontational work that utilized the most limited of resources into making it happen. Seriously, despite being shot on the equivalent of a camcorder with the usage of almost nothing but natural lighting and the houses of his friends or store locations he didn't even get permits from, the film is fluid, striking, and cohesive, when in all reality, it could have been a total mess. In those days, there was virtually no crew. I did my own camera, there was maybe a sound person, the producer PA, and whatever actors had scenes to do. We all just met at my old apartment, loaded up in my old deadbeat car, and shot stuff at various locations all over town. No permits, nothing. Then at the end of the night, my producer and I would drive out to the boondocks of Burbank to drop the film off at the lab. It was always so cool to watch dailies and see the fruits of our labor. It was really exciting to see these great looking images knowing that they were created with virtually no money, just sheer ingenuity and resourcefulness. Some night scenes I remember were lit with the headlights of my producer's old car, but they looked like $1,000,000. When I went back to digitally remaster and remix the film this year, I hadn't seen it for at least 10 years and I was really impressed how well it held up. The imagery looked amazing, especially when you consider its 16mm color negative that's almost 15 years old, and it was really awesome to use the state-of-the-art HD transfer rooms and digital mix stages with all the bells and whistles to tweak and fix stuff in ways that weren't even possible 12 or 13 years ago. And you know, perhaps I'm killing my own algorithmic chances here by saying this now, but you know, who gives a fuck, no one's gonna watch this video anyways. Totally Fucked Up is actually my favorite film in the Teen Apocalypse trilogy, and my second favorite Gregg Araki movie in general. With that being said, it is very close and steady in competition with the rest of the trilogy. But because of the experimental structure, the Godard homage, the low-key feel, and intentionally cheap but suave look, I can't help but love this film on a deeper level than I do a lot of other films, just because of how fascinating and impressive it is. And that is Totally Fucked Up, so let's move on to the second film in the Teen Apocalypse trilogy, which is The second installment of the Teen Apocalypse trilogy is 1995's The Doom Generation. And boy oh boy, this is quite the film. Easily Araki's most obscene and transgressive film at this point of his career. The Doom Generation was also the first film of his filmmaking career to fully up the ante on its production value, jumping from his usual $10,000 to $20,000 budget to near $1 million. And whilst that's not a big budget blockbuster, the money they had was put to the test and every cent is visible on screen. The film follows a young heterosexual couple who, by divine misfortune, are dragged into a murder accomplice runaway by another young man who hops into their car to get away from some gang members. With all three of them now suspects in a homicide, they're constantly driving and running away from various groups of police, ex-boyfriends, neo-Nazis, and many, many more. The Doom Generation is by far the most difficult Araki film for me to talk about, partly because a lot of the subject matter is stuff that I just cannot mention on YouTube, but it's also not really a film you can just recommend to people, because it is very, very fucking aggressive. From the very opening scene and the fiery welcome to hell party sign with Hearsay by Nine Inch Nails playing in the background, you're immediately shown exactly what you need to expect. A neon red hell of bloodshed where the only escape and freedom being sex. Araki makes what is pretty much his own surrealist dystopian world in the Doom Generation that directly reflects the social issues regarding queer use at the time. It is a very direct, on-the-nose, critical thrashing of America more than it is a film about romance and sex, even though it is definitely about those things as well. Directly associating the most obscene and horrific imagery with patriotism and American media. On-the-nose, satanic, comedic imagery is used as a sort of satirical way of calling these same people idiots for the way they treat rebellious youths like the devil for simply trying to live their lives. Our three leads live in what is basically a manifestation of what Araki and many other people viewed the world to be at the time. A horrifying, vast universe where everything and everyone is out to get you for who you are. Every moment of calmness we get to experience where things slowly seem like they're settling down immediately gets shot right back up to the top by a new character who has some sort of issue with the leads coming in and aggressively trying to get them too, making enemy after enemy for no real reason other than existing and being in the wrong place at the wrong time. In a way, everywhere is the wrong place and every time feels like the wrong time. Something will go wrong no matter where they go and what they do, because the country is simply too bloodthirsty to let them go. Their only escape is to give in to their desires and bodies once these moments of calm finally come. Through sex and pleasure, they escape the worries and concerns of the world around them. Yet at the same time, they slowly lose themselves in this addictive state too. It's rudimentary, yet obscenely romantic. My movies and my sensibility have mainly been influenced by two things. One is my queerness and my sexuality, and sex in general. Two is music and alternative music. I was in college when punk, new wave, all that stuff was exploding, so it's such a profound influence on my movies and sensibility. The way I describe Doom Generation is like a Jesus and Mary Chain song. The surface is a very noisy and chaotic and punk, but the core of it is this very sweet and romantic song. It ties to my background in film school and studying film and film history and everything of that sort. Couple on the Run movies in general are the story of this romantic love that's too pure for this world. It's always this couple that has this private romantic utopia, and when they're surrounded by violence and chaos, there's a world that's tried to destroy them. They Live by Night and Bonnie and Clyde and all those movies, that's what they're about. So the genre of the movie in general informs that, but it definitely comes from my sensibility in general, which has always been formed by the music that I've been listening to all my life. Psychosexual punk is the best way to describe a film like this, as it embraces things lots would consider to be rather grotesque or disconcerting. I mean, we live in a generation now that gets squeamish and whines at just the mentions of sex scenes alone. So a film like this, which was already a challenge to people at its time, would probably make just as many people uncomfortable. It's not a film that tries to hold your hand or play it nice. It's very upfront in its, this is just how the world is and we're fucked because of it. Araki does that sort of thing. He doesn't sugarcoat the way things are and instead does the exact opposite by highlighting these issues and bumping them up to 100 just to show how cruel people can be. It's an eat or be eaten world with people that don't want to do either. They just want to live and be happy and embrace their their youth, and the world wants to kill them for it. This is best showcased in the intense and horrific climactic scene of the film, which I cannot describe or show due to the high amount of blood, violence, and sexual imagery it contains. But what I will say is this: the Doom Generation, as sensual, punk, and romantic as it is one of the most effectively heartbreaking and stomach-churning films you could watch. It rips your heart out, plays with it, crushes it, and makes you watch. Another thing to note is the still very obvious queerness of the Doom Generation, despite the tagline, a heterosexual movie by Gregg Araki. It still contains what is, in all honesty, the most homoerotic performances and blocking that I've seen in an Araki film through James Duvall and Jonathan Shaich's characters. And obviously, no one is foolish enough to believe that Araki didn't make it this way without clear intentions. That's the exact point of it. What happened was that after Living End and Totally Fucked Up, this producer, Jim Stark, who had produced Stranger Than Paradise, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, helped us raise some money and bump it up to 35mm. After the experience of those two movies, he said, "You make these gay movies that are too punk for gay audiences, and gay people hate them." When Living End came out, the audience was so polarized. People loved it, but there were a lot of gay people that hated it because it's so punk and so politically incorrect. It just doesn't give a fuck. Jim told me, "If you make a heterosexual movie, I'll produce it and I can raise you $1 million for a real budget," because the other movies were like $20,000 or whatever. So in my punk rock way, it was like, yeah, okay, I'll make you a heterosexual movie, but it's going to be the queerest heterosexual movie ever made. The homoerotic subtext is purposely so exaggerated. I always thought it was cool because it's like a Trojan horse in that way. People who have never seen a gay movie, super conservative people, or even people who have never even thought about queerness will see the movie as being heterosexual. They'll see a straight movie because Rose is beautiful and hot and everything, then they watch it and are like, oh, what's going on? A lot of people tell me that my movies made them gay because it unlocks a thing that they've never acknowledged or had access to before. Probably my favorite aspect of the Doom Generation, however, is the surreal and Lynchian set designs put forth in the film. Prime examples of this include the two motel rooms, one splashed with a rose-colored red hue everywhere from the carpets to the beds, and the other being entirely textured by checkered black and whites all throughout. Another great example of the film's set design is a bar that the gang goes to whilst on the run midway through the film, where literally everything is covered and wrapped in tinfoil, and it's all perfectly natural to the world of the film. It's never questioned, it's just the way it's supposed to look. Whilst the Doom Generation is a mouthful to talk about and is quite discomforting in a very intentional way, when you get what Araki is going for and accept the aggressive world he's trying to paint out, there isn't any way you could picture this film being any better or more influential than it ended up being. It's a nihilistic, punk rock dystopian film that embraces our desires and bashes the patriarchal society that oppresses the world of youthfulness and sexuality, with its obscenities only elevating its effectiveness, making it another worthwhile and important benchmark in the world of queer cinema and independent filmmaking. Jeez, that was a mouthful. But yeah, that's the Doom Generation, the second film in the trilogy. So now we will be moving on to the final film in the trilogy, the culmination of it all, Nowhere.
LA is like nowhere. Everybody who lives here is lost.
And here we have reached the end of Gregg Araki's Teen Apocalypse trilogy with 1997's Nowhere, the biggest and most widespread film of Araki's trilogy and what's probably his most popular film outside of Mysterious Skin. Following up the Doom Generation statement was going to be tough, but Araki brought forward something just as stylish, more intoxicating, and even more universally applicable to young people with Nowhere. The film doesn't focus all too much on a specific narrative, rather than it focuses on just one day in the lives of many teen characters as they prepare for a big party later that night. James Duvall is back once again, cooler than ever before, and many Araki regulars and newcomers bring the energy and empathy that was ever so necessary here. The dialogue is utterly ridiculous, full of vulgarities and out there line deliveries that just strangely work very well in this very otherworldly setting. Of course, like Doom Generation, it's still the real world, and yet it's brought to feel both colorfully uncanny and intoxicating with familiarity. It makes everything feel like this vibrant science fiction world despite everything being relatively the same with no differences outside of things being a lot more stylized. Well, at least in terms of design. The film focuses a lot on alienation and is very on the nose with it due to the fact that there are literal aliens in this film that kind of just appear randomly and for no apparent reason either. But that kind of fits into what Araki is going for here. He makes things feel very confusing, as if you're supposed to look so much deeper into it, when all it really shows is that being young is a really fucking confusing thing. The film is all about the world that the youth imagines in their head, and how it operates. Both the stylish and colorful beauty of it, and the very melodramatic tragedy of it. Araki describes this very well here. My interest in cinema is my interest in creating parallel universes. My movies are not naturalistic or realistic per se. I'm not into setting up a camera and seeing what happens. The universe of these films is highly stylized. The way people talk, the way they look. Gestures carry weight and characters connect in a way that is faded. Definitely for Nowhere, the core definition of German expressionism is the character's interior states becoming exterior or made visible. That's how we approached the set decoration and designed all those rooms. What's inside these kids' heads? Nowhere was perhaps the zenith of that level of expressionism. Throughout the movie, we see the exploration of loneliness and incompatibility. Many characters are in relationships where one person will yearn for intimacy while the other actively avoids it out of either a lack of understanding of what it is or just simply fearing it. A lot of our characters are actively looking for a way to quote-unquote leave this world behind. Whether it be, once again, getting abducted by aliens, getting so high that you're already up in heaven, having so much sex that you don't think about anything else in life, or just cutting it all off. In just one film, Araki tries to speak to everyone who feels alone, like a weirdo, or like a freak, who feels entirely isolated and cut off from everything, those who feel lost, disinfected, and closed off from themselves. Rather than making a statement on the country or the government, it makes a statement on the entire world itself. It's a messed up place, a place so far gone due to the actions of those before us that we don't feel like it's even habitable for us anymore. The theme of apocalypse is most prevalent here. Where Totally Fucked Up was a more internal apocalypse and Doom Generation felt like a dystopian post-apocalypse, Nowhere feels like it's just on the cusp of one. Where every character is living their life feeling that every day will be their last, and wondering just what the point of it all is if everything's already gone to shit. I mean, what are they supposed to do? They might as well not have even been born if it's on a planet like this. The world is doomed, and so are they. But even then, Araki manages to create something so unbelievably dooming and nihilistic look so psychedelic, so vibrant, and so beautiful. From the very opening with the Avalon to Faden by Slowdive and the heavenly sequence of James Duval's character fantasizing in the shower, Nowhere feels like it's taking you by the hand and carefully leading you into a world that looks so eccentric and stylish, yet plagued by so much grotesque and scabrous things. A world where everything that could possibly go wrong will go wrong. I mean, I've always said my movies are for the punks and queers and the weirdos. My movies are about outsiders, and that's who they're for. They're for those who feel like they don't fit in or they're just different from other people, you know? They're definitely not mainstream. I think coming from a sort of punk rock alternative new wave world, that's kind of what it's about. You make your own space and find your own chosen family and live an alternate lifestyle. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I used to love going to Coachella back in the earlier days of Coachella, because to me, it really reminded me a lot of Nowhere. All these beautiful young people of varying kinds of sexuality and pansexuality, awesome music playing everywhere, and the sun was shining. It was kind of a utopian version of Nowhere to me, and it's kind of indicative of what I think about my audience. They're just off in their own kind of world, you know? It's not really the kind of regular everyday world. Nowhere is the culmination of every idea and statement that Araki had been moving for throughout his career during the 90s, and he brings together everything he stands for as an artist into one perfectly pop-punk film that'll make you feel just as enamored as it'll make you feel utterly devastated. And it's topped with the tragic irony that is Araki's comedy, where he can make you laugh in disbelief at things that may be pretty funny for their ridiculousness, but are also rather depressing the more you think about it. This especially goes for the final, shockingly gory scene of the movie between Dark and Montgomery, where things seem to be ending on a hopeful note and then boom, bam, splatterhouse everywhere and a giant fucking roach monster. It's so messed up and yet it's so fun. And hey, that seems to be what the experience of making Nowhere was like to Araki and to everyone else on the set of the film. Then, Nowhere was the exact opposite. It was summertime, it was warm and beautiful. Everybody was fucking each other. It would be just like a giant party on set every day. Even though I was working the whole time, it felt very utopian. Everybody was free, everybody had crushes on everybody. It was all very innocent and fun. God, to have been on that set must have been an experience. My biggest bucket list goal in life is to get to be on a Gregg Araki set one day before he's done making films. Please, I'll be an extra, anything. Please, Gregg Araki, if you're watching this movie, please put me in your next movie. Nowhere was my first ever Gregg Araki film, and I had fallen in love with the director's stuff as soon as I had finished my first watch of it. And revisiting it on 4K was one of the most breathtaking watches of my life. So please, watch Nowhere and the rest of the Teen Apocalypse trilogy. You'll not regret it. Or maybe you will if they're not for you, because they're definitely not for everybody. Gregg Araki is one of cinema's most unique, stylish, and radical artists of the last 30 years, acting as one of the biggest influences in contemporary queer cinema today. Many would say his style doesn't quite translate to modern day nearly as well as it did during the 90s and early 2000s, but I guess we'll have to wait and see for his new film with Cooper Hoffman and Olivia Wilde coming out this year to see. Which, by the way, I'm very excited to watch. Regardless of what you have to say past his trilogy and Mysterious Skin, there is no denying the impact that this man's relatively small films have had on independent and queer filmmaking over the years. He's a bold and radical voice at a time where films like these just could not be made. And you could also say that they couldn't be made today either. He is a one-of-a-kind artist and one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. And in my personal experience, his films have spoken to me more than any film by any other filmmaker ever. That is how special and important Gregg Araki's work is to me, and I advise everybody to go watch the Teen Apocalypse trilogy, The Living End, and Mysterious Skin if you get the chance. They may not be your most comfortable watches ever, but they are incredibly moving and impactful, and it's very important to have aggressive and risky filmmakers like him that aren't afraid to make audiences uncomfortable in order to push the right message, because Lord knows what we would do without films like those. And that's all I have to talk about today in this video. Gregg Araki is an amazing filmmaker that you really should get into, even if you aren't really into avant-garde cinema like that. He's worth giving a try at least. I do have another video on another one of his movies in the works, but that won't be out for at least another few weeks. If you did enjoy this video and want to see more videos of me talking about filmmakers like Gregg Araki and films like the Teen Apocalypse trilogy, then leave a like and subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell notification. I'm trying to upload as much as I can this year and plan on getting into a lot of other filmmakers so that I can make more videos on them. Gregg Araki is just one that's been very personal and special to me for a very long time, so I wanted to make something on him even though it's kind of a niche subject that a lot of people probably won't watch. But you know what, I don't really care. I hope you all did enjoy this video regardless, and once again, if you did, leave a like and subscribe if you're new, and really that's all I have to talk about today. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day.